And one of the ideas that is knocking around is this notion of a wealth tax, so a 1% tax on the assets of those who own more than 10 million. That's 22,000 people. That's not a lot of people.
You couldn't even fill a football ground with that.
You could not even
Not a Premier League ground.
Not even in Birmingham.
Definitely not a Man City. Plenty of empty seats.
But, that would raise you billions of pounds if you did that. And, the argument I say in the book is, look, rather than just put the proceeds of wealth taxes into general government spending, let's put it into something that looks and feels a little bit like the National Trust, because people are genuinely worried that governments waste money. We've got to recognise that is a fear that people have. But if you put the proceeds of those kind of wealth taxes into something like the National Trust or like a sovereign wealth fund, you would quite quickly be able to build up a fund of about 200 billion. That would take you about 4 or 5 years. And 200 billion is the kind of magic number in a way for me, because that would allow you to pay a dividend, a one-off dividend every year of £10,000 to every 25-year-old in the country. £10,000 is the average shortfall on a deposit to buy a house. So maybe this is the wrong idea, but it's a provocation. And if it's the wrong idea, my challenge to people is, okay, fine. You tell me a better idea for how we're going to help young people get a foot on the housing ladder. Because I know that we've got to build more houses, but you can't fix this problem simply by building more houses, because people will buy them up and house prices will still continue to rise. You've got to actually fix people's lack of money to put down a deposit to buy a house. You've got to have longer mortgages and lower fixed-term interest rates. All of that's true. But you've got to fix the deposit problem. Bank of England says the lack of a deposit is the biggest barrier to young people getting on the housing ladder. And there is a choice for us. We could say to people who have done super well over the last 10 to 15 years to pay a little bit more tax, perhaps as a one-off on their fortunes, and use that money to help young people get a stake in society. And let's not forget why the top have done so well in the last 10 to 15 years. We've put £1 trillion of quantitative easing into the monetary system. That's held interest rates down by, on average, about 1%. If you were lucky enough to own assets during that time, you've seen your fortunes boom.
You call it alchemy, the closest thing to alchemy.
It's the closest thing to alchemy. Yeah. And so let's call it a windfall tax. It's £1 trillion of money backed by British taxpayers. But the prizes from that investment has gone to a very narrow section of society, in particular the 22,000 people with the biggest fortunes.
How much money do you think the tax of 22,000 at 1% would raise? Do you know that figure?
It raises you somewhere between 3 and 5 billion
a year.
Yeah.
How would you get to 200 billion off 3 to 5?
So
5 years.
You do a couple of things. You put together a lot of the state assets that we already own. So things like the Crown Estate. The Crown Estate owns things like the riverbeds and the seabeds out to the 12-mile limit. Very valuable now that we're building wind farms on them. There's a lot of other assets that the government has got. You could probably get about 60 to 80 billion quid's worth of assets put together. You would then, I think, do 3 or 4 different kind of taxes. So a one-off wealth tax, equalising capital gains tax and income tax, like Nigel Lawson. Yeah. Ask people to pay national insurance contributions on investment income, which they don't do at the moment. Close a few of the loopholes in inheritance tax. Altogether, that raises you somewhere between about 15 and 20 billion a year. If you then add that to the state assets that we can already put together, and you deliver a return of about 6 to 8% a year, which is the average return of a sovereign wealth fund, by the time you're getting to year 5, you're getting, I think it's about 180 billion you're kind of getting to. So the point is you can see a pathway to this. It's not impossible. It's not magic. And the question is, well, look, if that's not the answer, well, then what is?
Yeah, I've always, I've advocated for deposits into junior SIPs at birth for kids to, benefit from compounding. Similar kind of thing. It's like a sovereign wealth.
Benefit from compounding.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And then you remove the pressure maybe to save as much for pensions, and then people can use that money for other things because we're leveraging time, right? And I look at like what we did with North Sea Oil, and we reduced taxes, and then is it Norway that just have now the biggest sovereign wealth fund on the planet?
If we hadn't just pissed away the proceeds of North Sea Oil, we would have a sovereign wealth fund worth £500 billion today.
That was a clip from our interview with Labour MP Liam Byrne, and you can watch the whole interview right here.